In this lecture, I just want to talk a little bit about BPMN and UML. And I want to first off explain what they are, talk a little bit about their differences and similarities, and then give you some guidance as to if you wanted to learn one or the other, which way you should go. So first off, BPMN and UML are modeling languages for creating visual models. Basically what they do is they create some standards for how you create certain models and the symbols you utilize, so then anybody with that experience can look at that visual model and understand exactly what you're saying. Process flows and different visual models back in the past before having these are kind of, it's the Wild West. Everybody just does what they want. Everybody has their own little spin on it as to how they show it. So these standards kind of got put into place to try to help with that and help shorten the pole, if you will, in regards to understanding exactly what those visual models are showing. We're going to start with the Unified Modeling Language, UML. That's the oldest one. It's still used in business today, but it's definitely the market for it seems to be shrinking as more and more people jump to the business process modeling notation for a few reasons that we'll get into. So, looking at them, I'm going to show you some examples and you're going to understand a little bit about kind of the different look and feel of the languages for the different techniques. So first off, what are some common things between them? First off, they're showing you elements of kind of a process flow. So the first thing is they show activities within a process, and activities are triggered by events. So regardless of the specific symbols they use, that doesn't matter. They both show activities. They both also have events, a manual or automated action that, or a delay in time that triggers some other type of action. So something that sets it off to say, okay, the event is a user clicks a button, or when you read that back, it meets a certain criteria, and so it's kicking off an event. A certain thing happens, and so it's kicking off some type of action. The gateway is where you're splitting pathways, and you could either have this where you're going multiple paths at the same time, or where you're having to make a decision. So did the user click yes or no? And that could be a decision pathway where if they click yes, you go this way. If they click no, you go this way. And it's a very simple one, but they both have some sort of gateway that you can utilize. Next, they also have flow. The whole point of a visual model, especially when you're talking like business process flows and activity flows, is all about the flow of data, and you want to see it from kind of where it starts, how it works through, what are the different paths it can go through, and then where does it end. So they both have a flow, and they both also can include swim lanes. And swim lanes are kind of a visual show of who is going to be doing what within the process. And I'll show you an example of that as we get into the BPMN example. So let's look at the UML activity diagram. So this is a diagram using UML, and this just works through and it just shows you it's a fairly simplistic diagram, right? We have our start at the top with the blue circle, and we work through and we have the verify pin, and then we go through a decision, and we kind of work through the full process. Overall, there's not a whole lot of symbols, right? I mean, we've got a couple on here, and there's some that I didn't include in this example, but you can kind of work through and understand the flow of it. Top to bottom was just a choice on this particular model that I made to make it a little bit easier to read, or what I thought would be easier to read, because the whole point of a visual model is making it easy to read. And so we're kind of working through that piece and kind of doing all those steps. But this could go from left to right if you wanted to create it that way. So it's not like UML has to be top to bottom. But you can see the symbols that are utilized and how it flows through. So that's an example of the UML diagram. Here's an example of the business process modeling diagram. And so this is a process flow. It's got the swim lanes. As you can see, you've got customer, ATM machine, banking system. And what this is doing is working through somebody entering a PIN in and validating that they have the correct PIN. That's all this process is doing. It's a zoomed in process that we're going through and validating, and then sending some type of notification back to the ATM machine to then tell it that it can move on to the next step. And so what you can see here, and here's one of the reasons why a lot of people are going to BPMN, it's a little bit easier to read. arguably part of that is because of how I set up the two diagrams in this case, but it definitely is easier to read regardless. As well as some of the real cool things that I like about it are some of the intermediary steps. So you see as you enter the pin and you flow down to the banking system, you have like a little mail icon within a circle. That's a message intermediary step. And so what that's saying is that there is a message being sent or received from that. And so it's nice to be able to see that. It kind of, hey, you can look at that symbol and understand that it's a message without having to read the text. And so I like that, as well as there's a ton of other symbols that are utilized, intermediary symbols, some that I've never utilized in any of my projects, but they're out there that you can use. And so there's all these different symbols that people utilize. The other thing that I really like is if you look at when it splits off into multiple paths, so if we flow through the validate pin and now we're at the diamond shape with the X in it, the X is telling you that you have to choose one of the paths. So it's a decision. So was the pin valid or invalid? And then based on that decision, it goes a certain path. If you flow on the invalid path and you get the failure notification, then you have another diamond there, but it has a plus in it, that is saying that that's an inclusive. That means both paths are going to be taken. So if they put in an invalid pin, the failure notification fires, and we want to log that to a pin failure log within the ATM machine or in the banking system in this case. And then we want to send a message to the ATM machine to tell them that the pin was invalid. And so we can not only send that message, but we can also do a pin failure log. So it's just nice that it includes some of that. And there's some additional pieces here where if you have a failure because of something that happens and you have a failure, you can have a whole nother flow built off to it just based on this modeling notation. They do a good job to have an intermediary piece where you can flow it off, and it makes sense when you look at it. If you would try to do that inside of a UML, it's going to get very confusing because you're going to have this separate process flow. But without those intermediary symbols to say that was because of failure, you're going to have to read text, and it's just going to get very convoluted. So I think you can kind of get where I'm going with this. If you haven't learned a certain modeling language, modeling notation, and you want to learn one, BPMN is probably the way to go. That's some of the most common that's used now. It's really coming and becoming real popular. So if you're going to learn BPMN.